I want to welcome everyone. My name is Martha Feynman, and I am the director of the Feminism and Legal Theory project here at Emory, and also the facilitator for the Vulnerability in the Human Condition initiative. And it's my pleasure to introduce JaeWon Kim, who is going to speak to us today on abortion in Korea as a Halle Speaker Series guest. JaeWon is a professor of law at SKKU in Korea. He has a very strong ties with the Korean Law Society Association, and in fact, I think is one of the people responsible for bringing that particular perspective to Korea. And he holds the title of honorary president of the Korean Law Society Association. JaeWon did his JD degree at American University Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C., and he did his JSD at Cornell University. I'm very proud to announce under my supervision, where he was my very best student. And I always like to say that. So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce him to you today. JaeWon.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha, again for very kind introduction, and thank you for everyone coming here. I know this is particularly a bad time for all of you, very busy for finals and ending the semester, and I'm so glad to have all of you here. And I have a good old friend and new friend here, so I try to be very comfortable about this talk. And as you see, my topic today is about abortion. This is, as you know, is very controversial and serious topic for any places. Korea is no exception. And but I'm trying to highlight some differences particularly in Korean context. I mean, the controversy in Korea is a little bit, to my understanding, is differently controversial compared to the controversy in the United States. And the reason I'm saying that is I want to broaden my topic in the context of Confucian culture in Korea, and I'm trying to show you how that difference affects this controversy. As Martha introduced me to you, and I'm basically a law and society person, and some of you are familiar with this topic. But I'm trying to explain very rudimentary things about this topic. We are interested in interaction between law and society. I mean, it seems quite obvious, and it doesn't need any more explanation. But usually, many lawyers are focusing on the law on the book, so legal text too much, and sometimes ignore what it really means, and what is the legal practice, and how people really react and perceive the legal norms. So in that sense, law and society studies are focusing more on this interaction. And I can give you many examples for this interaction, but to save time, and I can just give you a very short examples. And I mean, society is influenced by legal norms, and also when we make a new law, or when we revise a law, it also affects the behaviors in a given society. So, for example, the law's influence on society is if we make a new regulation on environmental law, and if we have a new air pollution law, I mean, it certainly changed the behavior the people in a society. And if if you make a law to require a substantial recycling, and people have to change their behavior, how to deal with their waste, and that's quite a good example of the law's influence on society. And on the other hand, society can influence the law. For example, you see we are living in a digital age, and many things are happening just because of technological advancement. It needs new law. And I mean, these days, when you are interested in the robbing bank, and you don't even need to go to, you don't even go to touch the door of the bank, right? And you can use your computer to bring some monies from other people's account. And that's the way we are dealing with the new crimes in the age of digital ages. So I mean, this kind of thing is a good example of how societies, and especially technological advancement or medical advancement or cultural changes affects the legal norms. And also, in many sense, we can see the interaction between law and societies. And today, my topic, this abortion law and the policy relating abortion, is a very good example. I think it's quite a representative case to show you the interaction between law and society. Okay. Having said that much about these very rudimentary things, I want to move to the next one. And I, excuse me, I mentioned about controversies, and it sounds like really a controversial thing, but in fact, it's a very simple controversy. So the fact is like this one: abortion was a crime in Korea, and it is still a crime. And Korean law allows only a very few exceptions to have legal abortion, but the government never enforced it seriously, especially since 1970s. We cannot see any enforcement of this law, and nobody was actually imprisoned or fined for because of abortion. Because of this non-enforcement for many decades, people in Korea, including the specialists in criminal law and feminist group, widely believe that the law is no longer valid. So we, as law and society scholars, we always portray law on the book on the one hand and the law in action the other hand. And even though the crime of abortion is still on the book, it's on the criminal code, we believe that in reality, in practice, it's no longer the law. Another example is death penalty in Korea too, and we have death penalty in criminal code, but a single case of execution was happened during the last 12 years. So according to UN statistics, if any country doesn't execute a person for over 10 years, UN recognized it as, in practice, death penalty was abolished, and Korea was in that case. But the controversy began just 2 years ago, and government was suddenly changed their policy and tried to revive the law and try to enforce the law. And it was a quite surprise to many people, because the experts in criminal law areas have been advising government to revise the criminal code, and one substantial part of that code, the code revision was completely abolishing this abortion provision in the criminal code, and there was substantial consensus on that issue. But certainly, government is trying to enforce it. So this is the whole picture of this fact, a sudden change of the legal policy. And let me tell you about some behind the stories. And since the fact of the controversy is so simple, I need to elaborate it more about it. And I really hate to pronounce this term, but some foreign news reporters are saying that South Korea is an abortion republic because so much cases of abortion is happening. And according to some reliable statistics, it comes from Korean Association of Obstetrician. It says that it speculates that nobody knows the exact number because it's not officially reported. It speculates that about 1.5 million abortions are taking place every year. And we have the statistics that Korea has only 460,000 newborn babies each year. So it's about 3 times bigger than newborn babies population. So it is regarded as a substantial. Even this kind of widespread practice, the government had not only turned their blind eye, because the government believed that for last 3 decades, for nation's rapid economic development, it is quite essential to lower the birth rate. So government endorsed this kind of practice and openly provided the financial support for operations in the name of family plan. And that was what was really going on behind the legal norms. That, having said that much, and we had some unintended and some anticipated consequences. And one is a very dramatic decline in fertility rate. And in early 1970s, fertility rate is 4.5 children, meaning that for a person, for a woman, we had this number, but it dropped rapidly by the year 2008. It's 1.19. It's one of the lowest birth rate in this world. So it's a quite substantial decline. And in addition to this problem, we have a very serious problem of imbalance of sex ratio. And expert says that the normal the ratio is 106 boys to 100 girls. That is quite a natural birth rate. And usually boys tends to die in early days. So naturally it makes the balance of 100 to 100. But in Korea, we have approximately 116 boys born for every 100 girls. In some regions, particularly the southern part of the peninsula, it goes as high as 125. is so significant. And only the comparable country in the world is China. As you know, China has long maintained the one-child policy. And under that circumstance, China's approximate sex ratio is about 119. So that's the worst case, as we know, and Korea is very close to that worst rate. So because of this kind of imbalance, and in rural areas these days, every 1 of 4 marriages is happening by, I mean, some people call it imported brides. And many people living in rural areas, they cannot find a person they want to marry. So that is, it caused a lot of serious concerns to general public in South Korea, as well as to the Korean government. And because of this kind of concerns, government changed their policies to suddenly enforce the death law of abortion since 2 years ago. So this is the whole stories about this controversy. And as I said earlier, I want to put these stories in a bigger and wider context of Confucianism. And I think, as you know, in this country, and people are divided into 2 groups, and so-called pro-life groups and pro-choice groups. And we do have that kind of division in Korea, but in addition to that, we have some other controversies coming out of our very peculiar culture. That is, as I said, it's a Confucianism. And I will show you this particular provisions of the criminal code and some part of criminal procedure, how they are embodying those influence from Confucianism. And I hope this part of seeing the text of the legal code is the only boring part of my talk. And I have also some problem with this English translation of the legal text, and one reason I see some problem is, the way we are articulating legal context is a little bit different from the English context, American context, and I think some of the translation is not that good, even though it's done by a government-supported legal institute, and so I ask you a caution about that part. And this is the main part of the Article 269. Is the main text about abortion. And it gives the up to 1 year's imprisonment if a woman procure her own abortion. And the paragraph 2 is that if a person helping woman, the person is other than doctor, is helping, then that person can have the same imprisonment punishment. And this is in the same article, the 3rd paragraph. It is very typical for many other countries, protecting fetus and integrity of the body of the pregnant woman. So it's not that peculiar one, as if anyone who injury or causing death of the pregnant woman, it can be more punished more severely. This is that part. And the Article 270 prescribing doctors and midwife and herb doctors and pharmacists and not to engage in abortion. And even with consent, total consent, a request of the pregnant woman, they can face up to 2 years imprisonment. And if there is no consent, it will go up to 3 years. And this is the same logic. While they are engaging in abortion operation, if they happen to injure or causing death, I mean, it goes up to more severe sentence, up to 10 years. And doctors can have 7 more years suspension of a doctor's license in addition to 10 years imprisonment. It's very severe punishment. So these days, since government suddenly try to enforce the law, the target is the mainstream doctors. And this is because of that, the Doctors Association is very concerned about it and appealing about this change of policy. And we have a special law called the Mother and Child Health Act. And this law is not part of the criminal law. It's part of the social welfare, or broadly speaking, it's a part of the health law. But this law has been the focus of the abortion debate in Korea because this law allows some very limited exception to abortion. And interesting part of this one is it requires consent not only from the pregnant woman but also her spouse. And interestingly, it includes de facto marital relationship person. So it's quite interesting in Korean context because unlike many Western countries, in Korea still we don't recognize outside the formal legal marriage. So, but in this law, it gives a substantial privilege or a status to this otherwise non-recognized person, the man usually, to give the authority to give the consent. This Article 14 provides 5 categories for exception to this prohibition of abortion. And this slide shows the first 3. And first is eugenic and genetic mental problem and physical problem. So it's too broad and it has strong bias against mental disability and some physical disabilities. So what I mean this, because of that, many people, including me, argued for many years to completely revise or abandon this kind of language in the law, but we didn't work very hard because we thought it's almost dead. So we don't need to work hard to fight against something dead. But certainly it revived. So it gives us a quite surprise attack. And the second exception is something we can understandable in some sense. And the third one is, many other countries are using that kind of things even in the United States, all the laws, and it's exceptions. And the fourth and fifth. And interesting is that, this law gives a very wide range of person within this. The fourth exception is if the pregnancy place between blood relatives. It's a very broad term, right? And even matrimonial relatives is even broader term. So it's very problematic to have this kind of law and even try to enforce this kind of law. Okay? And the fifth one is usually accepted to many other countries to protect the health and life of pregnant women. And this is the law in Korea right now, and it is coming back to enforce at the moment. And I want to briefly talk about paternalism. And as you may well aware of, this is, I mean, a very interesting topic for law and society discussion. And in general, in all areas of law, law has a very strong component of, paternalism. Paternalism is, simply speaking, state is acting like a father, and the state is, by means of law, saying that I did it not for the sake of my interest, I'm doing it for your interest. And here in this abortion context, a state saying that you woman, you don't know what's good for you, but I know what's good for you. So I'm going to enforce it for your interest. And also, the state, in the name of to protecting fetus, unborn child sometimes, and the husband and partners and boyfriend are saying that it's not only your body. I have a substantial interest in your body. And this is the basic claim behind this paternalistic intervention in this whole discourse. And I'm returning to Confucianism. And why Confucianism is, why it matters. And, personally speaking, I happen to be born in a country that Confucianism is a dominant the ideology of a culture. So I grew up in that culture. And I first came to the United States when I was 26 years old. And up to that time, I didn't know how much I was influenced by Confucianism. And I was brought up in a relatively the westernized family in Korean standard. So I didn't know how much I was indoctrinated by this culture. But I suddenly, vividly realized that when I came to this country first, and I'm totally different from the way I behave here, and I think it's different from the person lived outside the influence of Confucianism. So I became more interested in this Confucianism since I came to the United States, and I began to study more seriously about it. And right now, thanks to Chinese population and also Chinese return to Confucianism to the last 2 decades, and right now we cannot ignore this cultural teaching, because one every out of 4 people in the globe is heavily influenced by this tradition. And to me, I think from the perspective of feminist jurisprudence, and it is one of the most rigid and resilient form of patriarchy. And the last part is something I really say cautiously is, I'm still interested in Confucianism to recycle it, and because I found many good aspects of Confucianism, especially the community responsibility and its well-developed ethics of caring. So this part is, my ongoing research. So I'm just, putting, bringing these issues here, even though it's not quite much related to today's topic. Okay, I'm briefly bring your attention to China again, and China for last for the first 3 decades after Communist Revolution, PRC abandoned this relationship to Confucianism and tried to extirpate Confucianism as much as possible, and they viewed it is, it's a feudal reactionary worldview, and it must be get rid of. But suddenly, for last 15 years or so, Chinese became very interested in Confucianism again, and Chinese leadership is very often emphasizing that it is very critical to restore Confucianism, to build so-called this harmonious society. This is the big catchword for Chinese leadership right now. So in this context, not only the Korean context and Chinese context, in East Asian context, as the Confucianism is something very interesting and worth to studying as far as I'm concerned. And when we say Confucianism, the first keyword coming out of Confucianism is family. And family is very important for everywhere, but especially Confucian's heavy emphasis on family is it brings me a lot of attention because in Confucian context, the family is in between. It's a social order and the law, and so this is, it's a good way to see the tie between social order and the law. So I'm going to explain a little more about this point. And from now on, I'm going to show you some other part of the criminal code, not necessarily related to abortion, but to me, I think it is related to the Confucian influence on Korean law, including abortion issues. And this part is Criminal Code Article 257. It's very common criminal offense. It's a bodily injury, bodily harm. And it says that if a person inflicts bodily harm upon another, he or she can be punished up to 7 years in prison or fine. And the second part of the second paragraph is said that when this crime is committed on a lineal ascendant of the offender of his or her, of the offender or the offender's spouses, if lineal ascendant, this person will be more severely punished, right? As you see in the first cases, and if they are not lineal ascendant, the maximum sentence is 7 years. But here in these cases, it goes up to 10 years. And this kind of severe punishment against the lineal ascendant is so widely spread in all criminal codes in Korean context. By the way, I have to mention about this lineal ascendant. I think it gives you some sense, right? It's their mother and father and grandfather, grandmother. But I really have some problem with this English translation because it gives some, it brings some, it provides some meaning. But in Korean context, the term we Koreans use is not similar to this lineal ascendant. Literally speaking, it sounds like something a person respectable. that is the term we are using in the legal context. So it's not, not they are just there, the person is their parents or their grandparents, because that is the person who should be respected in Confucian culture. That gives, the term gives the offender, this offense more, something more hateful and severely punishable. And as I said, about the murder and assault, abandonment, cruel treatment, and intimidation. All these crimes has the separate paragraph, adding more severe punishment when it is committed on those persons should be respected. And we had one case recently, and one person challenged the constitutionality of these provisions, and because it's, the person argued that it's against the equal protection of the law, and why, that someone's, even their spouses, parents should be protected more than other human beings. So that argument was not accepted by the Constitutional Court of the Korea, saying that they clearly say that under our good tradition of Confucianism, that's quite acceptable, and that's not unconstitutional. And that is the case we had very recently. And we can see other, interesting examples here. It's a Criminal Code Article 155. It's about the destruction of evidence and harboring witness, and it's helping the escape of the criminal. And in this paragraph, the paragraph 4 says that if this crime is committed by a relative, head of the house, family living together, this person shall not be punished. And it's very interesting. They are examining criminality because of this kind of family relationship. So we are living in 21st centuries, and Korea is very, in many senses, a very high-tech society and liberal democracy. But still, some people who committed the crime escaped from the punishment because of their relationship as family members. So this is still, valid law in Korea, and I think not many people are challenging this, distinction in punishment. And interesting, another thing is Criminal Procedure Act, and Article 224 says that it limits, restricts complaint, and it says clearly that a complaint shall not be lodged against a lineal ascendant. So, the law allows, the parents some substantial protection from the law, privilege or some sanctuary from a criminal punishment. We cannot explain or justify this kind of provisions without reference to Confucian culture. And we also had a constitutional challenge about this case too, but the person was not successful, and Constitutional Court again said that it's okay to have this kind of special immunity to the lineal ascendant. I can easily find good reference to this kind of culture in Analogues of Confucius. And book 3, the paragraph 18, is a very well-known the Confucian text. And the governor said, Confucius, in our village we have an example of straight person. I'm not quite sure why they translated this one, a straight person. And it seems to me quite odd. And some texts translated is an honest person anyway. And when the father stole a sheep, the son gave evidence against him. And Confucius answered that, in our village, we are different, and that's the wrong way. And in our village, and it's father covers up for their sons, and son covers up for their fathers. In such behavior is straightness. And this, this kind of the teachings has been part of the traditional values for many, many centuries. And this kind of teachings are embodied naturally in this criminal code and criminal procedure. And I think I have to move fast, and I cannot complete my talk without saying about filial piety. And this is, very unique part of the duty comes out of a Confucian family value. And as I mentioned earlier, and in Confucian context, the family is between is state and the law, and moral association is, instead of using formal legality, is widespread practice in molding behaviors in this kind of society. And state has hegemonic power through this kind of practice, a filial piety, and father is like the head of state. And from very early days of the children, they are educated to practice filial piety in incorporating their attitude toward the state and the elderlies and the rest of the people they have to obey. And to me, and as a person who are doing feminist legal studies, the particular concern is, the filial piety is burdening women too much, and this is the old system of this duty is based on the sacrifice of women in this culture, and that is produced this kind of very low birth rate in Korea. So my observation and conclusion is we have to see all these pictures, and even though the Confucian culture has a good aspect, it has a very shortcomings and bad aspects, especially burdening too much on women. That is the real reason we have this kind of low birth rate and widespread abortion rate. So that is my basic observation. So while thinking about all these things, I can summarize my talk in this way. And first is the patriarchal Confucian tradition. And we have to focus this one to better understand the current controversies on abortion in Korea, especially the very paternalistic intervention by the law in this self-determination issues, and also son preference culture in China, Korea, and in some areas in this part of the world is it increases the practice of the abortion when they found the fetus is girl, and also the Koreans had long had some kind of unjustified myth of the homogeneous ethnic identity. Because of that, there are widespread fear of importing brides from other countries. And this kind of thing triggered government to engaging in newer initiative to enforce the old law. That is my observation. And I mean, as I said, all these things before, and it's all the talk I did is the relationship and interplay between family and the state. And also I got this vulnerability issue from Martha, and this is also related to my talk today. And it's the state and Korean society was very irresponsible to the burden the society has given on women, and they are looking at the wrong side and try to take the wrong measures to cope with these problems. And finally, my conclusion is that, I mean, as you see in this whole context of Confucianism and abortion in Korean context, is, I mean, it's a very male-centered law, and men made the law, and they are arguing against it and dictating women when they can access to legal abortion and when they cannot. And also a serious problem is using a female body as a means. And I mean, when in the early days of the economic development, and government heavily used female workers to develop industrialization. And even today, I mean, in the cell phone factories in Samsung company and LG's and washing machine companies, we see more than 80 or 90% of workers on the manufacturing lines are female workers, and in abortion context, and the government endorsed and encouraged women to reduce their births in order to have a high economic development. And certainly they see that is not good for their interest. So the government changed, forcing women to have not to have the abortion. So it's this typical way of using woman's body as a means. And this is, to me, obviously, is a very irresponsible measures to women's vulnerability. And I should say this much, and thank you for listening, and I would like to have your comments and questions. Thank you.
It states the principal argument against abortion, as you know, is that the fetus, the unborn child, has the same moral status as a newborn, as an infant. So if someone were to suggest that restrictive abortion legislation is paternalistic, the response you would expect from someone who makes that argument is that there's nothing paternalistic about protecting the human rights, the rights, the basic rights, the right to life of a human being. So in Korea, in the Korean context, is there religiously based opposition to abortion? And second question is the opposition, whether it's religiously based or not, is there also a significant segment of Korean society that insists that the moral status of the fetus is equal to that of a newborn child?
That's really a good question, but I wish I can answer that question, but I'm not prepared to answer that question. Just I want to give you my speculation on that issues, and it's not well documented, and I have very interest in that topics, but I haven't got the answer. And I can give you this much, and behind this big change of policies, religion really plays a very important role in Korea too. And the current president and many groups surrounding them. His aides are, very. They are. They announced that they are very strong belief in a Christian church. So I think that definitely counts one reason, and a moral obligation to support to protect the unborn child is also advocated by many civic groups. But I don't think in this context, particularly for the last 2 years, that is the significant force behind these changes.
You think it's a population issue and the importing brides issue?
Yeah, more societal and economic issue is more compelling. Yeah, please.
In this country, the recent downturn in the economy has led to an uptick in abortion, an increase in abortion, particularly among poor and more vulnerable groups, unmarried, Hispanics, African Americans. So is anything about the patterns of abortions or trends in abortions in South Korea?
You mean because of economic?
Yeah, is it affected by the economy? Are imported brides more or less likely to have abortions than non-imported brides?
Well, again, that's a very tough question. I don't think I can answer, but I'm really interested to try to find some answer for that question. Yeah, but as far as I know, up to now, the abortion was legal. I shouldn't say legal. As a lawyer, the abortion operation done by the good facilities and the hospital clinics is very accessible and it's inexpensive. So that the economic issue. The poor woman had not that serious problem compared to what happening in the United States to procure abortion. But I'm not quite sure about if we the relations between the increase of abortion or decrease in relation to the imported price and economic changes. Yeah, please, Ali.
JaeWon, I didn't get to say hi earlier. We were just talking about the fact that we think that in this country now you could get a couple of pills at the pharmacy and
under physician's prescription.
under prescription.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the week limit is on this, but maybe it would be 2 months.
No, I'm not sure.
But then you have what the law in Korea would call a miscarriage at home. So under Korean law, as far as what you just presented, that would mean that the pharmacist gets more jail time than the doctor who would have done a normal procedure in a clinic.
I think they same.
Was it about the same?
Yeah, same.
Well, anyway, I'm just wondering, since Korea is really at the cutting edge of all pharmaceutical research, you know,
Yeah, those are.
yeah. How is it that this that isn't happening? Are pharmacists going to jail right now in Korea for giving out pills that people would then call inducing a miscarriage? How many pharmacists?
We don't have the case yet, but if government is working more seriously about enforcing this law, that can happen. Yeah, but we have some doctors indicted recently.
In clinic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think as a matter of the fact it's much harder to find the pharmacists than the doctors who perform the abortion. So that might be some practical reason. But if we have a witness or the evidence, it's equally possible to punish pharmacists and to give such medicine.
And the prosecutions that have recently happened with medical doctors who are performing abortions in clinic, prior to that happening, were there any demonstrations like the Christian Rite, like you would find here, where you have people with religious motivation outside picketing, or even privately making an issue of this behind the scenes, which led to prosecution? Is it that's pushing this?
That's good point. To my observation, the official announcement, official explanation of the government, and the real the fears or the motivation behind that is completely different. So the government never say that they are enforcing it in order to increase the birth rate, and they think that they want to protect the unborn children, and they say that the Constitution guarantees the life, the right to life, and so they are enforcing. They are interested in that part, and some doctors who formed their association and trying to accuse another doctors performing abortion. They are saying that they are strong Christian. They have strong Christian belief. So they are not saying that they are, promoting any other social or economic purpose. But I don't think that's. If that is the only motive, why? We had the same constitution for last 3 decades, and there are so many Christian doctors, and why suddenly at this moment then they changed their mind to profess their belief? That's the reason I suspect. That's the only reason behind it. And please.
I was wondering about the exemption given in the ban against abortions to abortions for fetuses that are suspected to yield babies with cognitive disabilities and other kinds of impairments. What is the what's your impression of the motivation behind that? Is it something to sort of protect the gene pool generally, or is it couched in an idea of protecting parents from the suffering and difficulties of raising such a child, or is it about producing productive citizens, or what's the rhetoric?
I think for that one, I'm quite sure that the both. That there are no single motivation behind this legal text, and we had a very shameful the tradition of giving stigma on the disabled person. So that's one reason to relieve the parents to raise their children having that kind of social stigma, and that also practical reason to reduce the social cost. I think that in that sense, we have many multiple purposes, not only one. Yeah. Yes.
What is the Confucianism impact on the abortion? And the second question is, what is the relationship between the tradition and the abortion in South Korea?
Tradition?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think the two questions related to each other, and Confucianism, the influence from Confucianism or the Confucian tradition is, this according to this tradition, the ancestor worship is a very important part of the tradition, right? So because of that, traditionally the male, the son, male descendant has the duty to serve this ancestor worship. So every family obliged to have at least one son. I mean, that is the influence to have motivation to have the abortion if they found the fetus is a girl. That's the impact. And I think that's the most serious one. And also the Confucian culture had a very strong bias against disabled person. So that also encouraged people not to have disabled children. And I think that's those two key influence from this tradition. Yes, please.
I think the Confucius tradition actually like praise a person with many children. That is one of the happiness
Yeah.
criteria, having
Yes.
a lot of children. So I think that is kind of against the abortion too.
Yeah, you're right. Confucian tradition always cherished big families. Yeah, so I don't think the Confucianism itself advocating any the abortion itself or the small size of family, but since in Korean context, from the early 1960s, the government planned long-term economic development, and they think that as I said before, to reduce the birth rate is very critical to achieve that goal. So in that context, they said that to have more than 2 children is a very unpatriotic activity in Korean context. So if you have to have only 2 children, even in one child in a Chinese context, you have to choose, and that forces people to have son instead of daughters, and that I think that there are some relationship between those tradition and this kind of forced choice. But you are right. I don't think the Confucianism is related to the directly related to the abortion and having small size family. That's right. Any other question? Please.
Is there a social stigma associated with taking a imported bride? How are the imported brides looked at culturally?
That's really very good question, and also a very complicated one and delicate one. And I think I briefly mentioned about some the unjustified myths, widely spread myths in Korean society about homogeneous Korean ethnic nationality. And scientifically speaking, that's not true. But Korea is relatively isolated. They maintained for long centuries very isolated, relatively speaking, to other countries, because they are located in 2 big countries, Japan and China. So the Koreans have long believed that to have isolated policies is much better for their survival. So in that context, relatively speaking, there are less exchanges of people. So Koreans had that kind of, the thought that Koreans are very racially, identical. So in that sense, Koreans are very poor in dealing with, diversity issues, especially ethnic issues. So that is, to me, that is the biggest shortcoming of Korea to be big player in a globalized society. And in that sense, I honestly have to say that they do exist. There are some substantial stigma, social stigma, against imported brides. Yeah. Thank you.